So this is how the original render looks, and this is where we start. And over here, this entire chain is me splitting up all of the diffuse, reflection, specular passes, so everything that comprises the beauty pass. And I'm also separating these per light, so this is why there are a lot of these. So if I go one by one, we can see that this is the diffuse from our main light, which is also giving us the volumetric. So this is why we see this noise pattern. And then we have the diffuse for the sky HDRI. And all of these passes follow the same structure basically. So the GI will have one for the main light and one for the HDRI. Then we have the same for the reflections and the same for the refraction. And the refraction is really just one of our grains material. So one of the 5 copies that we created will have this refraction layer. And then we also have our specular, and in this case I decided to only use it for the light that's the HDRI. So all of these are added together. If I go to the result, here we can see what this looks like. And I can actually disable all of these, so we can just turn them on one by one. So we start with the diffuse, and all of these just have a bunch of grading nodes on them. Nothing really special, so I usually do a grade. If I disable this, I start with a grade that controls the luminance, then I might add some more or less contrast, and then with another grade I might change the hue, so I added a little bit more yellow in this case. And then I can turn on the other light as well. And for this is going to be the same, so we can see that this makes a big difference. The first one is used for the luminance, and then with the second one I made everything a little bit more yellow. So all of these grading adjustments are really kind of my own personal artistic choice to get a very specific look that I was after, which is kind of like this very bright golden dream-like look. So I can turn on all of these other lights one by one. Here we have the GI, then we have the reflection, so this doesn't really add a lot. Then we have our reflections, our refractions, so our special grain material, and then we also have the specular, which is mostly affecting the logo and a little bit here in the back. So already we can see a big difference where we start from here, and after we separate everything and put them back together and make grading adjustments per layer, we end up with something like this. And at any point I can go to either of these and I can add another grade node with G. And for example, if I want to add for some reason some blue inside the GI layer, I can increase the blue here. So we can already see that this gives us a completely different look. Now this looks terrible, but it's just to illustrate the options that you have. So usually I just add a grade, I isolate the layer, and I turn on the gain and gamma, and then I do another grade which I can use to adjust some of the colors themselves. So if I want more yellow, I can introduce more green and decrease the blue, and then I can go to the final result and check out if the grading works. So I can turn this on and off. So this is kind of the workflow that I used. So I'll go ahead and get rid of these. Let's go ahead, let's go to our other layer. So this will be this fog layer that we recently discussed in the Houdini section. For this, let's see, we bring out the fog and I desaturated everything. So I made this gray. And also I had to use a clamp here because these pixel values that are in the back, which don't really intersect with any kind of geometry, were having really high values. So if I disable the clamp, we can see over here, this has RGB value of 37 as opposed to all of the other ones, which have just regular values between 0 and 1 and maybe slightly above 1. So I had to get rid of this in order to color correct it properly. I used a clamp, and with a grade node, this controls the luminance. And I also keyframe the intensity of this, so it's darker in the beginning and then it gets a little bit brighter towards the end. And with this gray node, I'm just turning everything a little bit more orangey, so we are kind of maintaining that golden theme. So we add this on top, and here it is. Let's move below, and over here, this is the position path. So if I look at the result with this, I'm using the world position to darken the very front of our geometry. So this is the effect that we achieve. And I like to do this a lot of times with my projects. So if I bring a shuffle node and I bring the world position, so our P pass, and this is pointing to our main render over here. So we can remember that we also selected to export our world pass in the AOVs. So in the shuffle, we bring in the world pass. And in this case, I needed the X direction to map this grading effect. So I plug the red channel inside the alpha. So if I press A, we have the world position of our X direction. So these values will correspond with the ones in Houdini as well. If I were to select a grain that's over here, its position is going to be, so let me just Control Shift click to select this region. So its position for this grain over here is going to be 0.7 on the X. And then with a grade node, I can remap these values by animating the black point and the white point. So this is the ramp that we can create, and then this is used as a mask inside this grade node. So when I turn this on and off, we can see this area that we isolate. So I can go to this grade node over here, and I can darken this even more to make this more obvious. And I can always go back to this grade node, and I can play around with the white point to remap this gradient further. And I can even do something pretty cool, which is if I adjust the offset here, it sort of travels the whole geometry on this X direction. So this is also something really cool, and I created a lot of custom effects with just animating this offset and the world position. So this is a very handy pass to have. I always like to add this in my renders, even if I don't end up using it. Moving further down, we have our volumetric pass. So when we shuffle this out, the first thing that I do here is add a noise reduction. So this is using the Neat Video Reduce Noise plugin. And I kind of prefer this over the regular denoise that Nuke provides. But you can totally use Nuke's denoise as well. It gives pretty good results, but the Neat Video version is a little bit better. And we can see a lot of flickering pixels here, these white dots. And this is a redshifting when it renders volumes in general, especially if you have lower samples. But even if you have very high samples, you would still get a little bit of these flickering pixels. So I use this pixel fixer node from Nukepedia that can detect pixels that have a super high value compared to the pixels around it, and we can use it to isolate and remove our white dots. So I can increase or decrease this threshold, and we can see that this removes the pixels. So this is again a very handy node. It's free on Nukepedia, so I definitely recommend it. Then we have a grading, and again I'm using this to mainly control the luminance, and this is also animated, so it starts a little bit lower in intensity, and as the scene progresses I introduce more gain, so I'm increasing the gain here with just a few keyframes. Then we do a saturation to make this black and white, and with this grade node I'm controlling exactly how much yellow I want these god rays to be. And also I have another grade node here which is using a ramp, so this is just a simple ramp to essentially make the god rays right here in this corner a little bit darker. So this gets added on top, and moving forward here, let's see. I have a custom effect here that's isolating some of these grains, and I'm adding some glow to them and then plusing them on top of the comp. So really I'm just making a few of these grains a little bit shinier. Maybe this is actually a little bit too much, so I might reduce this effect. It's again to make this whole shot a little bit more stylistic and more fantasy-like. And if I look at how this layer is built, I'm bringing in, so this is pointing to the original render. I'm using another node from Nukepedia, which is the P-Noise Advanced. And this just generates a noise pattern for us and automatically maps it to the geometry based on the world position. So again, we are using the P-Pass to create more effects. So this is really cool because it kind of sticks with the geometry. So we can see that as I scrub the timeline and check the animation, the noise is sticking on the geometry, for the most part at least. So a very useful node. And on the right, I'm grabbing the refractive layer from the main render. So this is again that special material that we created for that one type of grain from all of the 5 other types. So the refractive AOV, and with a grade I'm controlling the luminance a little bit, so I'm also animating this value over time. And I'm multiplying this with this custom created noise. And I'm just adding some glow to this with the AP Glow node, again a node available on Wikipedia. And I found that this is by far the best exponential glow node. Alright, so this gets added on top. And then if we move further down, I'm using the same AP glow noise on the whole render, so on the entire comp so far, to sort of isolate the brightest part. So this will be mainly all of the parts that are intersected with the God rays. And I'm making this a very soft and spread out glow, so we can see that this persistence here that controls pretty much the spread is quite high, and also the response rate is quite low here because this introduces more contrast. And then I'm using this layer as a mask for a grade node. So if I go to the result of this grade, we can see that for the mask I'm using the red channel from this layer, and all I'm doing here is slightly decreasing the gain and the gamma. So if I decrease this even further to illustrate what this does, we can see that we are darkening all of the areas that are around our God rays. So this will make our God rays pop a lot more. Now let me go back to my original settings here, but this is what this gray node does, and we can see the difference here. And then the same layer I'm simply plussing on top of everything, so after the grade node. And this is with the God rays. And when we do both of these together, we can see that overall we have a lot more contrast and our God rays are stronger, and I think they look a little bit nicer like this. And finally, the last layer that we add over here is going to be just a simple flare. So if I go to this, this is the flare that I created, and I just used the preset here for, I think it was multi-penta, and I just increased the radius basically for this, and so I increased the size here, I think. And there are a lot of settings that you can play around with, or actually I think I increased the size over here. And really there's a lot of stuff that you can see. So this gives you a lot of flexibility to create the type of lens flare that you are looking for. Then I desaturated this so I can grade it back. I'm increasing the contrast here, so I'm just decreasing the gamma and increasing the gain. And with this other grade node, I'm turning this yellow, and I'm also multiplying this with the same layer that's based on our glow from the God rays. So I'm multiplying this on the flare, so this is the result. And then I'm softening everything up with a blur node with a fairly low size, and I'm adding this on top of our main comp. And finally, I also use a motion blur node with almost the default settings here. So I just reduced the shutter time to 0.65. And we can see that this motion blur really does a nice job. So I'm really happy with this result. And this will be our entire comp. And with this, we have reached the end of this tutorial. I hope you found this useful and that you learned some new things. And hopefully we can see each other again in a new tutorial.